Hi, I'm Hans Habeger, and this is For Art's Sake. Well, this is a recent body of work from the past 3 years, and really has developed from my experience of painting urban landscapes in plein air. But all of the work in the show is from mostly photographic references, as well as from memory and imagination of places that I've seen and driven by quite frequently that kind of catch my eye for the quality of light in the space, and also just the elements of the lines of the building, the lines of the architecture, kind of the simpleness of some of the facades of the strip malls and stores around suburban Chicagoland. And I really break it down a little bit in my studio and try to focus on cropping these sections of these buildings to focus more on simplified aspects of the space, and feel a lot of freedom in combining different images from different photos to make the paintings really a construction that come about through the process of painting and drawing. I started painting plein air in 2000, and then started getting more into it when I was living in Iowa and focusing more on just urban landscapes really in the Des Moines, Iowa area. And I was really interested in artists that did these kind of sprawling urban paintings of more expansive spaces, views under overpasses, and I would primarily paint on location there and find interesting viewpoints to set up my easel and work from, and paint on pieces over several months actually, or even returning from one summer to another to develop that larger painting. And that's also where drawing came into play, and I started doing a lot of sketching on site as preliminary drawings, doing larger scale drawings on location. That has carried over into my work in Chicago, is relying more on drawing, because I feel like I kind of think best through composition and value first with drawing versus painting. And I get to know the space better through the drawing process. But what really changed when I moved to Chicago, the Chicago area, was I stopped working directly from life or from observation, plein air. And I started working more from photos and from imagination. Part of it might have been I was just kind of taken a little bit out of the area that I'd gotten so used to painting from, which was Des Moines. And also my teaching schedule changed. I didn't quite have as much time to get out and paint, and so I started to work a little bit more just in my studio at night, coming up with these spaces from imagination that I had seen. And I really became more intrigued with working that way and interested in those types of paintings versus painting plein air, which is a lot more about the experience of working on location sometimes than it is about the painting itself. I mean, there's a lot about that, versus in the studio it becomes primarily to me about the painting itself, and I like that interaction. So that was a big change really, and it did take me some time to kind of get used to that and kind of figure out what I wanted to work on in my studio, but also get used to that change. And so it took me a couple of years to really get that focus down of this current work. All the drawings in the show were done with Conte crayon on Mylar, or drafting film actually. And I started doing those drawings maybe about 3 years ago, again right around the time that I started really focusing on this type of work. And I'd become interested in artists' work who use that type of drawing material. Mary Borgman, who's a portrait artist out of St. Louis, and Michael Karakin, who's an artist based in Minneapolis. Did a lot of drawings on that drafting film. I was really intrigued by the mark making that they had in their work, and they were still able to get very resolved images. And I had never used that surface before with Conte crayon or charcoal. And so I started experimenting with that medium. At the same time, I started to kind of test out some of these new compositions that I had gotten from photographic references, almost like preliminary drawings in a way to kind of figure out if I really wanted to do a painting of that view, if I wanted to change or add elements about the view. I could experiment with tonal qualities, spacing and alignment from the compositions in the drawings. So when I first started using it, I knew I really loved that medium, just the surface. The drafting film is a very smooth, translucent film, so you have to put a white piece of paper underneath it to get that white ground, and I have to kind of tape it down to a board to kind of keep that under the paper underneath and the film in place. The surface is really easily erased, which is kind of unusual for a smooth surface. If you're using a regular paper, you might get a little ghosting from the Conte, especially because gets a really rich, deep dark. And so that's what I really liked actually about the drafting film, is that you could take it back down to the whiteness of the ground and rebuild and layer over the top of it. So it was pretty forgiving in that sense, and I like to rework the drawings a lot and discover things through the act of drawing that I might not if I was just trying to really replicate the photograph. Before that, most of my preparatory drawings were actually line drawings in the past, really focusing on spacing and the blockiness of buildings, proportions. But now I pretty much mainly do these tonal drawings, and they started to become independent pieces on their own. I started working larger scale, just like the painting, so they kind of fed one another a little bit in the scale and in the mark making as well, and the decision-making process about value and how far to create contrast or similar tones to get an overall atmosphere, kind of evoke a feeling in the drawing, and that really served as kind of a lead into the paintings. Those are two qualities that you might see as a contrast in some respect. And it's what I love about abstract painting, not objective painting, is the formal arrangement really of lines and tones. Artists that I'm inspired by are Pete Mondrian and Richard Diebenkorn for their use of those lines to balance, but also especially with Diebenkorn, color fields or areas of color, the balance of those, the division really of the picture plane, and that's why I really started to mainly straighten things out in the photographs, or from imagination, to straighten out the architecture, make it more straight on, similar to that arrangement of Mondrian and Diebenkorn, so that it has an emphasis on flatness. It echoes the picture plane. That's kind of at the heart of abstract expressionism, is really the idea of surface. And then there's a part of me that is a representational painter, and painting from life, it's always about light and tone and value. And when I was painting on location a lot, I would really be concerned when I first found a location, what's the time of day that fits that space best? Is it morning? Is it afternoon? Is it evening? What's the direction of the cast shadows, the lighting? How does that affect the sense of structure to the elements, but also the overall sense of space? And I'm really attracted to landscape painters contemporary and historical landscape painters who have just a mystical sense of light sometimes in their work. Contemporary artist is Randall Exon, who paints a lot from memory, and because of that he really kind of brings up this sense of like almost a spotlight on certain aspects of a space. The way the light might fall on a building or a subject to create a mysterious quality to the image, but formally it also might serve a purpose of creating movement and balance within the image as well. And so when I'm taking the photographs, now that I'm not working from life, I can really go to these locations at different times of day and kind of seek out when the light is interesting in the space or the overall atmosphere. I've done some pieces that are more maybe hazy or kind of rainy day or at night, and I like that different type of atmosphere as well, where the light is more artificial. But yeah, for the most part in the paintings, I really try to push up and kind of pump up some of that contrast to really bring out that strong light, which helps really with the modeling of the form as well. Really, they developed, again, going back to plein air work, when I was working on location, I started seeking out spots, number one, where I wouldn't be bothered that much by passersby. And they tended to be the tops of parking garages, out of the way kind of side streets, or locations like that in behind a strip mall somewhere where there's not a lot of foot traffic or car traffic in general to be bothersome. And I started doing these smaller kind of 1 to 2 shot paintings outside as little almost oil sketches. And I did a location like that from life behind a Kmart, and I was just really intrigued about the simpleness of the space and just the quality of the light again in there. And it almost brings out the light even more when there's not this overall grand subject. And I feel like you should be able to paint kind of everyday objects, simple forms, or gritty kind of urban spaces and make them look beautiful just through the way that you paint them, and make them interesting by the way that you make them as a painting. And I really firmly believe that through the idea of what painting is as representational art, is that it can be about those everyday forms, and it's really about how you paint it. I started becoming more intrigued with those locations, and I commute a lot to work, and so I'm in my car driving past strip malls and Home Depot stores and subdivisions, these kind of mundane spaces that we live around daily in the Chicago area. And things would kind of catch my eye for the color or the arrangement of the lines of a building. I thought that could kind of make a painting. And so I would go back to these locations, take some photographs, or even do some sketches from memory of driving by those spots. And that just kind of fed itself, and I started going out more with my camera and specifically looking for those types of spots. Some of them, like the cardboard bundles, the first cardboard bundles painting, is almost a happy accident, just driving around, finding that location, and having that cardboard out there at the right time of day, and shooting the photographs. It was just a perfect moment that was caught. So sometimes you get lucky that way. Other times I have to go back to the spot because I like the subject, but it's just not the right time of day to shoot the photographs, and for whatever reason the lighting isn't right. So I'll go back and drive to that spot specifically. And it seems like there's really a plethora of things that I can work from as I find different areas around where I live in Chicago, closer to the city or even further away. And so I have it seems like an endless supply of those types of subjects. And it seems like a lot of people are also, and viewers are also, intrigued by the subject for that quality, the kind of the out of the way place without primarily people in the location. And I also like to think that just the way that I paint them, besides the view itself, kind of makes it interesting to the viewer.
Get the ball rolling to a new career with an Eastern Illinois University degree at Parkland College.
Parkland and Eastern really made it work for me.
Now I'm taking Eastern classes on Parkland's campus.
I'm working on my bachelor's degree from Eastern without commuting.
Thanks to Parkland and Eastern, I'm reaching my goals.
For more on Eastern at Parkland, call 217-351-2543.
Catch live, play-by-play coverage of Parkland sports. Live the action live. Cobrasports.net.
I felt like I wanted to be more involved in the school activities at Parkland. And I knew a friend that was in Club Latino. You meet a lot of new people.
We just go to different schools to encourage them to consider college.
This club was actually highly involved in Parkland College, Abre las Puertas a tu Familia. This club did translating, greeting, and taking families on tours. But it's also about having a place to hang out with each other.
I like that dual credit classes are challenging and that they prepare me for college.
I'm going to major in materials engineering at the U of I. Dual credit classes gave me a head start on my college education.
Well, in graduate school, I was primarily a figurative artist. I painted a lot of paintings with multiple figures, more narrative type storytelling scenarios almost, and got into composing the picture with the figure, and did a lot of drawing from life and figure drawing classes of the model throughout undergrad and graduate school. And it was really at the end of graduate school where I switched to having more of a love for landscape painting. So the figure has always been an interest of mine, but with these recent pieces at first I wanted to kind of keep the figure out consciously, even if I took a picture with a figure in it, edit that out, so it was just about the space. And part of that, I guess, is the idea of wanting to have some relationship with abstract painting and not have it be the figure creates such a focus to it. It has more implications of a storyline, the emotional quality maybe of even just the pose that a figure has, the setting, the contemporariness of the dress, or the interaction with the space that the figure's in. So there's a lot more complexities once you start to do that. And for that reason, I guess I kind of not avoided it, but purposely kept the figures out of the paintings. When I was working plein air, once in a while I would incorporate a figure or several figures into the space, and to me that seemed logical as I was painting there and trying to be truthful to what was going on in the space. The drawing that's in the show, called Girl on the Phone, was an image that intrigued me because the figure almost kind of acted as one of the the formal elements of the piece. She became more of a diagonal line in the composition, very frieze-like, and that was more from a profile view of the figure. The face was hidden also of the woman, so you didn't have that conscious look of who is this person, what's their facial expression. It was just more about their pose and how they fit into the scene. And that part of using the figure interests me a lot in these paintings, and something that I would like to incorporate more in future pieces, probably containing it to more of a single figure, so that it's more about their interaction or placement in the painting than a grouping of figures. And then when you incorporate more figures, it's about their interaction with each other, which doesn't interest me as much. That piece is very recent. It's a view of a Dunkin' Donuts at night. The night scenes, to me, are intriguing. They develop really, again, of places that I've driven by or walked past in my immediate surroundings. And so if something kind of catches my eye at night, I try to go back there again and shoot some photo references. That night scene with the Dunkin' Donuts, it was something that I passed by quite frequently. It was just this, inside the light was just hitting off of the orange wall and really captured my eye, as well as like the electric neon light outside in the way that it framed the building. I cropped those photos and did some sketches and started the piece and realized kind of a similarity to a couple of Edward Hopper's pieces. One of them is called Drugstore, and the other one is famous, the Nighthawks painting. Now that I know, or now that I've realized more of that, the relationship between those images, I'm not as interested perhaps as making a painting of that drawing, because I feel like it might be seen as relating too much to Hopper's work, and I really don't want to do that within my paintings. I have a lot of artists whose work inspires me, but I want to create my paintings so that they are mine, and it's not looking like it's a rip-off of somebody else's concept or composition. I like it when there are some relationships, certainly, and I have used some elements of Mondrian's compositions within my works deliberately as kind of a framework for the composition. But I also like the idea of remaining current and not falling into this nostalgia aspect of landscape painting. As I do the paintings and come up with the photos, considering how does this fit within my series of work, and is it something new, or does it have a freshness to it? And the night paintings, the night scenes really intrigue me for that different kind of atmosphere that you capture, the feeling of a street at night, the loneliness of a person walking on the street at night. I kind of like that idea of the surroundings, and that kind of relates to the more vacant views during the daytime as well. So I see myself doing more of those pieces in the future, certainly. I love painting skies. I've always had this response, just a wonder-like response at amazing skies and paintings throughout art history. Just the ability to capture a sense of movement of the sky, or the lightness of the sky at different times of day has always amazed me from a lot of different painters. And I get a lot of joy out of painting the sky. And so actually a lot of them do get repainted quite a bit, and I kind of take more liberties with them since I painted so many of them that depending on the composition, the compositional elements of the clouds, the just the amount of space that it takes up or occupies within the piece. I've repainted them, sometimes just knocking them down to be a very flat color, a very consistent blue, so that it's not about the activity of the clouds in the space, but it's really more about a formal quality of a block of color up against another block of color, which would be the tone of the buildings. And I kind of like that kind of clear crispness of some of those blue skies, like in the Skokie painting with the vents on the top. And the sky is really just a slight change of color hue of light blue to a darker, kind of more like maybe even ultramarine blue in the upper section of the sky. And they're probably some of the more fun parts, actually, of the painting that I really enjoy. So going from the drawings into the paintings, most of the time the drawings are done before the paintings, or at least started before the paintings. And as I get into the actual painting, I'll do a line drawing, typically in vine charcoal or graphite. It's kind of a looser drawing in the beginning. I don't want to get too tight or too specific with just one part of the piece. I'd like to work really broadly in the beginning and think about the entire surface of the support that I'm working on. To me, the painting really doesn't begin until all the white is kind of blocked in, and I can kind of see it as this faded picture, in a sense, of the big color tones that make up the composition. And then I can start to decide on if I need to change sizing and spacing of the elements within the picture, how I can start to become more true with the color, or if I want to change the color a bit in the piece. So it starts out with kind of a wash of oil paint with turpentine as kind of a thin base layer. And then after that, I really do work more directly and more opaquely over the top of that. Still perhaps with a turpentine wash, but then switching to a 3-part medium of linseed oil, turpentine, and Damar varnish. And then it becomes really about color mixing and thinking about the relationships between the colors, especially the colors that sit right next to each other on the surface. Might be from the side of a car to the building, the interaction of the tones. And as I develop more and more detail within a part, I then start to focus on just certain areas within the painting. And in the passing by painting in particular, it might be the area of the car, the building and the sidewalk, the cast shadow around the car. And I start to break that subject down into smaller and smaller areas of color and value. And I try to tell my students to be as general or try to be as specific as possible with their generalization within their drawings as well as within their paintings, because they have to see their subject as tonal shapes, and with painting with color shapes and spots of color. And that's really how they get more of a lifelike quality that helps them really see and understand color in a formal way, as well as how can they manipulate that color to change the space, to add more of an emotional quality to the piece. Just all the different roles that color has, with the effects of it in a painting. And as I'm painting the cardboard bundles, I'm doing the same thing. I love painting those and breaking them down into all these different color spots. They really do look quite abstract when you look at them up close. And I think that's important, as well as just trying to see the subject as those little spots of color, really keeping in mind the bigger picture. And sometimes I struggle a little bit with how loose versus how tight that I want to be with the painting, and I have to stop myself when I feel like I've really captured something in a good way, and I don't want to overfuss with it in the piece.